They thought she was just another new face in the crowd. A quiet black girl in a sea of noise. They thought she'd flinch when they laughed, back down when they mocked. But she didn't, because they didn't know her. They didn't know about the hours she spent in the dojo, or the quiet promise she made to herself every time she tied that black belt around her waist. They thought dragging her here would be the end of her. But it was only the beginning of something they couldn't control. Subscribe to Endless Stories and share this video if you believe that true power doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from standing your ground when everyone else wants you to fall. The first day at Jefferson High was supposed to be quiet. But for Aisha, it was anything but. She stepped off the bus with her shoulders squared, her backpack slung low, and a look in her eyes that said she wasn't here to make friends. The early morning sun painted the cracked pavement in gold, but she barely noticed. All she saw were the faces turning to watch her. Some curious, some cold. Aisha was used to being new. She had been the new girl before in cities she barely remembered. But this was different. This was Jefferson High, where the hallways hummed with secrets and kids learned fast who was in charge. And Aisha? She wasn't interested in any of that. She walked past the smokers in the corner, the basketball kids dribbling in the parking lot, the groups that shifted and laughed and stared. She kept her head high, her steps even. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft but firm. Never let them see you're afraid, baby. Never. She was almost to the main doors when she heard it. A laugh, sharp and bright like glass breaking. She turned and saw them. 3 boys leaning against the fence, their eyes following her every move. The leader, a tall kid with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes, stepped forward. "Hey, new girl," he called. His voice was too loud, meant for everyone to hear. "Where'd you come from? Africa?" His friends snickered. Aisha didn't flinch. She looked at him, then past him, her gaze calm. She didn't bother to answer. She just kept walking. But he wasn't done. He pushed off the fence, his sneakers scraping on the concrete. "Don't ignore me, girl. I'm talking to you." Aisha stopped, her shoulders stiff. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. They were dark, steady, the kind of eyes that didn't blink first. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him. And in that look was everything she didn't bother to say. It was enough to make him pause. Just for a moment. Then he laughed again, but it sounded forced. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue." His friends elbowed each other, their smiles sharp and mean. Aisha let the silence stretch, her jaw tight. She didn't move, didn't speak. She had learned a long time ago that words didn't matter to boys like him. He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the cheap cologne on his shirt. "You think you're too good to talk to me?" he said, his voice dropping. "You're just some new black girl. Nobody here cares who you are." Aisha tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his. She could feel the way the air shifted, the hush that fell as other kids watched. But she didn't care. She wasn't here to win them over. She was here to survive. Without a word, she turned and walked away. She heard his laughter behind her, sharp and ugly, but she didn't look back. She had promised herself she wouldn't. Inside, the hallway was crowded, lockers slamming, kids calling out to each other. Aisha moved through them like a ghost, her backpack brushing against shoulders, but nobody stopped her. Nobody tried to make her feel welcome. She didn't mind. She had her mother's voice in her head, and that was enough. She found her locker, the number scrawled on a slip of paper in her hand. She spun the dial slowly, her fingers steady. She could still feel the echo of that boy's laughter, but she pushed it away. She had bigger things to think about. As she opened the door, she caught her reflection in the small, dented mirror taped inside. Dark skin, dark eyes, hair pulled back in tight braids. She looked at herself for a long moment. Then she reached up and smoothed her collar, her movements deliberate, like a ritual. "I'm here. That's enough," she thought. The bell rang, and the hallway shifted, bodies moving in a wave. Aisha pulled her backpack higher on her shoulder and stepped into the tide. Her chin lifted. She didn't see him again that morning, but she could feel the weight of what had happened. The way eyes lingered on her a little too long, the way whispers followed her down the hall. She ignored them. She had learned how. But as she sat in her first period class, she felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, but something colder. Something that said she was done letting them decide who she was. And under her breath, she whispered the words her mother had taught her in the quiet of their living room. The words she said every time she tied the black belt around her waist. I am not what they say. I am what I know. Outside, the day moved on. Cars honking, teachers calling roll. The world spinning in its endless, indifferent way. But for Aisha, everything had narrowed to this one hallway. This one fight she hadn't started but was ready to finish. Because they didn't know. They didn't know about the hours in the dojo, the sweat and bruises and the quiet pride of the black belt she kept folded in her bottom drawer. They didn't know about the way she moved when she was tired of being afraid. They didn't know, but they would. By lunchtime, the whispers had spread like wildfire. Aisha felt them even when she couldn't hear them. The weight of every curious glance and half-hidden smirk. The cafeteria was a blur of noise and motion. The slap of trays on tables, the screech of chairs on linoleum, the low hum of 100 conversations. But for her, every sound felt distant, muffled under the tension that simmered just below the surface. She sat alone at a corner table, her lunch untouched. She wasn't hungry. Her mind was elsewhere, tracing every move she'd made that morning, every word she'd left unsaid. She could feel the boys' laughter still clinging to her like a shadow, that sharp, ugly sound that said she didn't belong here. Across the room, she saw them. The boy and his friends, holding court in the center of the cafeteria like they owned it. He sat with his back to her, but she could see the tilt of his head, the way his shoulders shook with laughter. His friends leaned in close, their eyes flicking over to where she sat, their grins sharp as knives. Aisha's jaw tightened. She took a breath, steady and slow. Her mother had taught her that breath was power, the first defense against fear. In the dojo, every movement began with breath. In this cafeteria, it was no different. She pushed her tray away and stood, her movements smooth, deliberate. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room turn to her as she crossed the cafeteria, but she didn't let it slow her down. She walked straight past the tables of kids who whispered behind their hands, past the girls who stared with wide eyes and the boys who smirked like they were in on a joke she wasn't invited to. When she reached the trash cans, she paused. She didn't look back at him. She didn't need to. She could feel the heat of his gaze on her, the challenge that crackled in the air like static. As she dropped her tray, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned slowly, her face calm, her posture loose but ready. It was one of his friends, a tall, lanky boy with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice low, as if he thought the quiet would scare her more than shouting. "You think you're better than us, huh? Walking around here like you don't see anyone." Aisha didn't answer. She just looked at him, her gaze steady. She had nothing to prove to him or to any of them. He took a step closer, his grin widening. "We don't like girls who think they're better," he said. "Especially not girls like you." The words were meant to cut, but they only sharpened her resolve. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She let the silence stretch out between them, let him feel the weight of it. Finally, he laughed, the sound brittle. "What, you gonna hit me or something?" he said, his tone mocking. Aisha tilted her head, a slow smile curling at the edge of her lips. "Only if you give me a reason," she said, her voice calm, even. For a heartbeat, he hesitated. He wasn't expecting her to speak, or for her voice to be so steady. Then he leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Maybe I will," he said. She could feel his breath on her cheek, sour and close. But she didn't move. In that moment, the cafeteria disappeared. The noise, the whispers, the fear. All she could feel was the steady rhythm of her breath and the quiet strength in her bones. Then, behind him, she saw the boy, the leader. He was watching her, his smile gone, his eyes narrow. He raised a hand, and the tall boy stepped back, his grin faltering. "Leave her," the leader said, his voice quiet but edged in steel. "She's not worth it." The tall boy frowned but didn't argue. He stepped back, his hands up in mock surrender. "Whatever you say, man," he muttered, backing away. The leader stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. There was no laughter now, no easy smirk. Just a quiet calculation, like he was trying to figure out what kind of game she was playing. "You think you're tough," he said. It wasn't a question. Aisha met his gaze, her chin lifting. "I don't need to think," she said simply. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Around them, the cafeteria moved on. Kids laughing, teachers chatting, the world oblivious to the silent standoff playing out in the corner. Then he nodded just once. "We'll see," he said, his voice soft. "We'll see." And with that, he turned and walked away, his friends trailing behind him like shadows. Aisha watched them go, her shoulders relaxing only when they were gone. She knew it wasn't over. Boys like him didn't back down that easily. But she wasn't afraid. She had faced worse than him in the dojo, in the world outside these halls. And she would face this too. She turned back to her table, her steps sure, her breath steady, because she knew who she was. And no matter what they said, no matter how they tried to break her, she wouldn't let them see her fear. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of textbooks and lectures. But Aisha could feel the tension simmering beneath every word, every glance. She felt it in the way the teachers called on her, too polite, too careful, and in the way some kids wouldn't meet her eyes at all. She felt it in the way her shoulders stayed tight, as if she were always ready for the next blow. When the final bell rang, she moved through the crowded hallway like she was gliding, her breath slow and steady. She didn't hurry, didn't let them see her rush. She moved the way she'd been taught, calm, controlled, balanced. Outside, the autumn air was sharp and clean, the sun already sinking low behind the school. She should have just gone home, but she felt it, that weight in the air, that sense that something was waiting for her. And it was. They were by the bike racks, their laughter soft and mean. The leader stood with his back to her, his hands in his pockets, his friends flanking him like a wall. As she approached, they fell silent, their eyes fixed on her. She didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She walked straight to her bike, her movements deliberate. She bent down to unlock it, the cold metal biting at her fingers. She could feel their eyes on her back, the hush of the world around them. "You think you're better than us?" the leader said. His voice was soft, almost conversational. Aisha didn't answer. She didn't even look up. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her hands. "You think you're tough," he said. "But you're just another girl who's gonna learn her place." Aisha stood slowly, turning to face him. Her face was calm, her breath even. "You think you know me," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "But you don't." His mouth twisted into a smirk. "I know enough," he said. "I know you don't belong here." Aisha tilted her head, studying him. "That's your problem," she said softly. "You only know what you can see." He laughed, but it was a short, sharp sound. "What, you gonna fight me?" he said, stepping closer. She didn't move. She didn't need to. "Only if you make me," she said. The boys behind him shifted, their grins faltering. For a moment, the leader just stared at her, as if he was trying to decide what she was really made of. Then, with a sudden lunge, he grabbed the handlebars of her bike and shoved it to the ground. The metal clanged against the pavement, the sound sharp in the quiet evening. Aisha didn't flinch. She took a slow breath, her eyes never leaving his. She saw it then, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the split second where he realized she wasn't going to back down. "You're gonna regret this," he said, his voice low. Aisha bent down, fingers curling around the strap of her backpack. She pulled it off slowly, setting it on the ground beside her. She moved like she was in the dojo, every gesture deliberate, every motion balanced. The boys behind him fell silent, their smirks gone. They watched her with wide eyes, the quiet stretching out around them like a held breath. She straightened, her shoulders relaxed, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet. "No," she said, her voice calm. "You are." For a moment no one moved. The world held still, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the last light of the sun catching in her braids. Then he lunged. He was fast, but she was faster. She stepped to the side, her body turning fluidly. She caught his arm with a sharp twist, her movements clean and practiced. He stumbled, his eyes wide with surprise, and she let go, letting his own momentum carry him forward. He caught himself on the bike rack, his breath ragged. He turned to her, fury in his eyes, but she didn't move. She stood there, calm and ready, her posture loose but unshakable. He took a step forward, but one of his friends grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Man, let it go," he said, his voice tight. "She's not worth it." For a moment, the leader looked like he might fight him too. Then he pulled back, his chest heaving. "This isn't over," he spat. Aisha didn't answer. She just bent down, picked up her bike, and set it upright. She moved like she wasn't even aware of the crowd that had gathered. The kids watching from a distance, their eyes wide with something that looked a lot like respect. She slid her backpack over her shoulders and looked at the leader one last time. "Maybe not," she said, "but it's over for today." And with that, she pushed her bike toward the sidewalk, her steps measured, her head held high. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because in that moment, she knew. They could try to break her. They could try to push her down. But she wasn't going anywhere. The sun was almost gone by the time Aisha got home. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the last light clinging to the edges of the world like a promise that tomorrow would come. She walked her bike up the cracked driveway, the chain rattling softly with every step. Her mother's car was already there, the engine ticking in the quiet evening air. Inside, the house smelled like spices and warmth. Her mother stood at the counter, stirring a pot on the stove. She looked up as Aisha walked in, her eyes soft and tired. "How was your day, baby?" she asked. Aisha set her backpack down slowly, her fingers tracing the worn fabric. "It was fine," she said. Her voice was steady, but she knew her mother could hear the edge beneath it. Her mother didn't press. She just nodded and turned back to the stove, the quiet clink of the spoon against the pot filling the space between them. Aisha watched her for a moment, the gentle strength in her shoulders, the way she moved with a kind of quiet certainty. It reminded her of the dojo, the balance, the discipline, the calm. She went to her room, the small space filled with the familiar comfort of her things. The soft sheets on her bed, the posters on the wall, the black belt folded neatly on the dresser. She picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth fabric. Felt like a promise, a reminder of who she was. She changed into her GI, the white fabric crisp and clean, the belt tied around her waist with careful precision. She stood in front of the mirror, her reflection clear and strong. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of the day, the laughter, the jeers, the sharp edge of fear that she had swallowed down. Then she bowed her head, her breath slow and even. She moved through the katas one by one, each motion deliberate, each breath a rhythm that steadied her heart. The world outside her window faded away. The whispers, the laughter, the weight of what they thought they knew. In this room, there was only her, the quiet, and the truth she carried in every muscle, every breath. When she finished, she stood still for a long moment, her heart beating slow and steady in her chest. She felt the calm settle over her like a shield, a quiet strength that no one could touch. She untied her belt and folded it carefully, placing it back on the dresser. Then she changed back into her clothes, her hands sure and unhurried. Her mother was waiting in the kitchen, 2 bowls of soup on the table. She looked up as Aisha walked in, her eyes searching her face. "You're okay," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Aisha nodded. "Yeah," she said. "I'm okay." They ate in silence, the only sound the soft clink of spoons against bowls. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows, but inside, the small kitchen was warm and bright. Her mother reached across the table, her hand closing around Aisha's. "You're stronger than you know," she said. Aisha smiled, a small, quiet smile that didn't need to be big to be real. "I know," she said. After dinner, she sat by the window, the cool glass against her forehead. She watched the streetlights flicker on one by one, the soft pools of light pushing back the dark. She thought about the boy in the cafeteria, the laughter that had tried to drown her out. She thought about the way he had flinched when she didn't back down. She knew it wasn't over. She knew tomorrow would come with new tests, new challenges. But she also knew she was ready, because they didn't know her. They didn't know about the hours she had spent in the dojo, the nights she had spent teaching herself how to stand tall when the world tried to push her down. She took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. She felt the calm settle over her again, that quiet certainty that was stronger than any shout, any threat. She wasn't here to prove herself to them. She was here to be herself, no matter what they thought. In the quiet of her room, with the soft light of the street lamps painting the walls gold, she whispered the words her mother had taught her, the words she carried like a talisman in her heart. I am not what they say. I am what I know. And with that, she closed her eyes and let the quiet wash over her, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Morning came with a chill in the air, a soft fog clinging to the streets as Aisha pedaled her bike to school. She felt the weight of the day ahead, but she wore it like armor, each breath steady, each movement measured. She had learned to carry herself like this, calm and centered, no matter how loud the world around her roared. When she walked into the hallway, she felt the change immediately. The laughter didn't come in whispers today. It was sharper, more brittle. She saw the glances, the way people shifted when she passed. Some looked at her with new respect, others with something closer to fear. She didn't let it touch her. She kept her chin up, her shoulders loose. But she knew he would be waiting. She saw him by the lockers, the leader and his friends, their voices low and mocking. He leaned against the metal doors, his eyes tracking her like a predator. She didn't look away. She didn't let him see even a flicker of doubt. As she reached her locker, he stepped forward, his grin lazy and cold. "Morning, new girl," he said, his tone soft but edged with steel. "Had a good night's sleep?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own language, one he hadn't learned to read. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "You think you're better than me? Think you can embarrass me in front of everyone and just walk away?" His breath was warm on her cheek, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not here for you," she said, her voice calm. "I'm not here for anyone but myself." His smirk twitched, a flash of something uncertain in his eyes. "We'll see," he said, straightening up. "We'll see if you still feel that way after school." She watched him walk away, her heart beating slow and steady. She knew what he meant. She knew today wouldn't end in the classroom. The hours crawled by, each lesson a blur of words and numbers she barely heard. Her focus was elsewhere, on the steady rhythm of her breath, the feel of the ground under her feet, the quiet strength she carried in her bones. When the final bell rang, she packed her bag carefully, every motion deliberate. She could feel the weight of the day, the hush of expectation in the hallway as she stepped outside. The sky was a deep blue, the sun dipping low, shadows stretching across the pavement like dark rivers. He was waiting by the fence, his friends flanking him like sentinels. The crowd was already gathering, drawn by the promise of a show. But to Aisha it was just another test, one she had been preparing for her whole life. She walked toward them, her steps slow and sure. She could feel the eyes on her, the whispers riding the wind. She let them fall away. In her mind, she was in the dojo, the smell of sweat and leather, the quiet focus of breath and balance. When she stopped a few feet away, he stepped forward, his smile tight. "You ready to learn your place, girl?" he said. She met his gaze, her shoulders relaxed. "I already know it," she said. "Do you?" He laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "You think you're tough? Show me." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just set her backpack down on the ground, her movements calm and deliberate. She let her breath settle, her hands loose at her sides. She had nothing to prove to him, only to herself. For a moment the world went quiet, the hush before the first movement. Then he lunged. He was fast. Faster than she'd expected, but she was faster still. She turned, letting his momentum slide past her. her hand catching his wrist and twisting just enough to send him stumbling. The crowd gasped, a sharp intake of breath that cut the air. He turned back, fury in his eyes, but she was already moving. She stepped in close, her balance perfect, her breath steady. She didn't hit him. She didn't need to. She just let him feel the strength in her stance, the quiet promise that she wouldn't bend. For a moment he hesitated. Just a heartbeat. Then he swung. She moved like water, smooth, sure. She caught his arm again, turned it, let his own weight carry him to the ground. He fell hard, the breath knocked from his chest. She didn't follow him down. She stood tall, her eyes calm. The crowd was silent now, the hush of awe in the air. He scrambled to his feet, his face red, his breath ragged. But he didn't come at her again. He just stared at her, his chest heaving, the fight gone from his eyes. She picked up her backpack, slinging it over her shoulder. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She just turned and walked away, her head high, the quiet strength of the dojo in every step. Behind her, the crowd began to murmur, the whispers already turning to something new. Not laughter this time, but something closer to respect. Aisha didn't care. She wasn't here for them. She was here for herself. And in that quiet, she knew. They could threaten her. They could push her. But they could never break her. The sun had set by the time Aisha reached home, her shadow long and thin in the glow of the streetlights. She walked her bike up the familiar steps, her breath a soft rhythm in the cool night air. The sky was a deep velvet blue, the stars just beginning to appear, tiny lights against the endless dark. Inside, the house was quiet, her mother's music drifting low and warm from the kitchen. Aisha set her bag by the door, pausing to listen for a moment. The familiar melody wrapped around her like a blanket, soothing and sure. Her mother looked up as she walked in, her eyes soft with questions she didn't ask. "You're late," she said, her voice gentle. Aisha nodded. "I know." Her mother didn't push. She just reached for her, her hand resting on Aisha's shoulder for a brief, steady moment. "You're safe," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Yeah," Aisha said. "I'm safe." They ate together in the quiet, the clink of spoons against bowls, the warm light pooling around them. Outside, the night was cool and still, but inside, there was only the small, bright circle of their kitchen. A place where she could breathe, where she could let her shoulders soften, even if just for a moment. After dinner, she slipped away to her room, her feet bare against the worn carpet. She stood by the window, watching the slow drift of headlights on the street below. The quiet of the night felt different now, less like an absence and more like a promise. Place to rest, place to begin again. She turned to her dresser, her fingers tracing the folded black belt that lay there, the symbol of every hour, every bruise, every breath that had led her here. She picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her hands, the smooth, familiar texture beneath her fingers. She remembered the way they'd looked at her today, the fear, the disbelief, the respect that came only when you stood your ground. She remembered the silence after he fell, the hush that said more than any shout ever could. She tied the belt around her waist, each motion slow and deliberate, a quiet ceremony for no one but herself. In the mirror, she saw not the new girl, not the target of their laughter, but the fighter she had always been. Calm, steady, ready. She moved through the katas in the small space of her room, her breath even, her movements precise. Outside, the world kept moving, the murmur of voices, the soft sigh of tires on pavement. But in that room, there was only the rhythm of her breath and the quiet certainty in her heart. When she finished, she stood still for a long moment, her hands at her sides, her eyes steady in the mirror. She thought of the boy's laughter, the way he'd tried to push her down. She thought of the way she'd stood up anyway, and she knew it wasn't about the fight. It wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about the promise she'd made to herself long ago. I am not what they say. I am what I know. She untied the belt, folding it carefully and placing it back on the dresser. Then she slipped into bed, the soft sheets cool against her skin, the weight of the day finally easing from her shoulders. Outside, the night was quiet, the stars bright and distant. She closed her eyes and let the calm settle over her, her breath deep and steady, because she knew who she was, and no matter what tomorrow brought, she was ready. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, if you felt the power of standing strong even in the face of cruelty, please subscribe to Endless Stories. Like and share this video, because sometimes the quietest fight leaves the loudest echo.